We're speaking today about the impact this Russian invasion of Ukraine has had on our energy sector here in the UK. I wanted to unpick how much of this has had an impact on you and me and how it impacts on big companies. My next guest can answer just that to perfection. Delighted to be joined live now by Lord Karan Bilimoria, founder of Cobra Beer, president of the Confederation of British Industry, life peer in the UK House of Lords, and also University Chancellor. I don't know, Karan, how you fit it all in. Great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us. When you sit there with your CBI hat on and you look at the horrors of what's unfolding in Ukraine, and then you read what is happening on the energy price front for ordinary folk here at home, how pessimistic do you get?
It's an absolutely tragic situation. I think all of us just watching this horror unfold in front of our eyes is just so awful, so sad. And I remember very clearly the 24th of February when the war started. And I look back to last April, May, when India had this awful COVID crisis, where the second wave in India, where there were sadly so many people dying, running out of oxygen. And we, my team, the CBI and I, worked with the Indian High Commissioner and the Indian government. And our companies just came to the fore, unhesitatingly, straight away. And we were able to help out and save lives. And it worked. And when this happened on the 24th of February, I said, we can't just sit back and watch this happen. Yes, sanctions, absolutely. We get behind sanctions totally. Yes, the government helping the Ukrainians in every way they can, arming them, having trained them. All that has to happen. What can business do? And I got a message that Vodafone, one of our members, was starting to give free phone calls to anyone in Ukraine. And I said, let's do it again. Let's get in touch with the Ukrainian ambassador who I'd met before. I got in touch with him over the weekend, had an emergency meeting on Monday. Last Tuesday, with 24 hours notice, I convened an emergency CBI President's Committee meeting, Chairs Committee meeting, Trade Association meeting, Ukraine ambassador and I sitting in Holland Park in the embassy. In less than 24 hours, 75 of the who's who captains of industry turned up. And we said, this is the help that we need. Can you help? If I tell you as to the help, that it is amazing. BP giving free fuel, Shell giving free fuel, Scottish Power giving generators, sending generators up there. They said we need ration packs. We dispatched this week 40,000, the first lorry loads of ration packs that have been sent out there. I mean, I could give you example after example. Rolls-Royce saying we'll give you generators, we'll send generators across to help out. So without hesitating, British business has come to the fore. And that's what we're doing. And every day I get more and more messages coming. This is what we can do. This is what we're sending across. That's the spirit. That's what we're doing. Yeah. Quite apart from money. Companies giving millions of pounds of money as well. So this is, I think, where we can not just sit back, but work at it.
I totally agree. And earlier on in the programme, I was talking to a friend of mine in the equestrian sport industry, and even at their level, they are doing their bit using horse boxes to get stuff out there and hopefully bring back refugees as well. But taking a step back from it, Karan, the other thing that we've talked about with our mutual friend Damien Green, former Deputy Prime Minister, voices from think tanks and the rest of it, is do you fear, as a human being, that we've written Ukraine off? Street fighting, trench warfare is not going to see off the superpower that is Russia. However much your members help in the short term, long term, Ukraine has been knotted through tragically.
Not at all. I was in Parliament on that historic day this week. It's never happened before. The only time we have a joint session of Parliament is when Her Majesty the Queen comes for the Queen's speech and the Commons are summoned to us in the House of Lords and the Queen addresses both Houses of Parliament. This time, we went from the House of Lords to the House of Commons and we sat in the galleries, including the public gallery, were full of peers, and both houses were addressed by President Zelensky. We gave him a standing ovation even before he started speaking. We gave him a standing ovation after he finished speaking. We're not allowed to clap, let alone stand and clap. It was one of the most emotional moments that any of us, any parliamentarian, would ever have experienced. And that's when he very clearly said that he's not going to give up. And that's when he quoted Shakespeare and said, is it to be or not to be? It has to be to be. And so we are 100% behind helping Ukraine in every way that we can. Of course, we're very wary and very careful about the escalation going further and triggering what people would refer to as World War III. but we're doing everything that we can. And it's, in a way, united Europe. It's united NATO. You've got countries like Finland and Sweden now wanting to join NATO. I mean, look at how this has backfired for Putin, where Finland has a border 1,400 kilometers with Russia. And if they join NATO now, you've got NATO right at Russia's border in a much bigger way, in area. So we are standing united as a world. There's no way Ukraine has been written off. We are going to do everything we can, the business community, this country, the global community, to help Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that. Very, very thoughtful, and I didn't interrupt because I wanted to hear the whole argument. You know, Karan, because the team told you that we were talking about Ukraine, which we've just done, but also talking about the energy crisis. An old friend of mine, Rory McCallion, who writes about the prospects of industry, particularly manufacturing. And he said last year was better than we'd expected, and this year stands every chance of being pretty good as well, unless the war in Ukraine disrupts trade so much and the energy crisis is not addressed by Her Majesty's government. People simply won't have the confidence or the cash to get out there and give the demand that your members need to build the economy. Is he right or wrong?
The reality is this, that if you go back to May last year, when I chaired the B7 before the G7 that we hosted in the UK in June, the chief economist of the IMF said you're going to have a bounce-back V-shaped recovery. You've put £400 billion in rescuing your business's economy and jobs. You've got a great vaccination program. You're going to bounce back. Well, the reality is since then we've had anything but a bounce back. We've had what I would refer to as a very fragile recovery with one issue after another. Well, before Ukraine. So if you remember, we had those queues at the petrol pumps. Then we had the energy crisis start last summer. Then we had labor shortages. Then we had inflation starting to rear its head. Oh, inflation's going to go to 3%, it's going to go to 4%. Now inflation's going to go to minimum 8%. In much of my supply chain and my own business in Cobra Beer, we've had costs increase by 25%. We've had freight costs increase by 10 times. So inflation is rampant now. Then you've got interest rates creeping up as well. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And on top of that, the highest tax burden in 70 years. This is the worst time to put up taxes. It's never a good time to put up taxes. But to put up taxes to its highest level in 70 years, when we've just come out of a pandemic, businesses have suffered so much, we've been down on our knees, we want to recover. You don't want to stifle the recovery by putting up taxes. So I've been saying to the Chancellor for a long time, going back to a year ago with the budget, do not put up taxes. What's happening? It's one tax after another going up. Some good news, the super deduction, 130% encouraging companies to invest for growth is perfect. What's happening? Next year, that super deduction is being taken away and corporation tax is going up from 19% to 25%. Next month, national insurance is going up from 1.25% for individuals, the employees and the employers, let alone the energy costs that have just escalated.
Sure.
And fuel poverty, heating. So the consumer is squeezed, businesses are being squeezed, we're stuck in a rock and a hard place. We need to generate investment and growth. How do we generate investment and growth? That's the key, because that's going to save this economy, not putting up taxes.
But also, what's intriguing in that analysis, and I put a lot of that to Damien Green, and he said, no, we've got to hold our position on national insurance because borrowing has to be contained, debt has to be contained. The simple fact of the matter is, my view is that this is a government, a Conservative government, that is driving the demand side into the ground with higher taxes and not doing enough about costs like energy. And the supply side, you guys, Rory McCallion, the rest of industry, are holding their hands up in shock and surprise from a Tory government.
So can I say this? I'm all for being fiscally conservative, fiscally prudent, and balancing books. I mean, we in business, you have to do that. But also, you've got to be realistic. Let's look at this situation. We don't want to borrow more. Well, what did we do in the pandemic? The government had to spend £400 billion. In absolute terms, per capita terms, that's one of the highest in the world. It didn't have the money to do that. It had to borrow. Borrowing has gone up to 100% of GDP. This was the worst global crisis, the pandemic, since the Second World War. What happened to borrowing at the end of the Second World War? It went up to 250% of GDP. It took until the early 1960s for it to come down to 100% and then further after that. Needs must. If we need to borrow now, we have to borrow. Let me give you an analogy. I love tennis. If you're playing tennis and you take your backswing and you hit the ball, that's your £400 billion. If you stop there, the ball is going to go into the net. You have to follow through to get the ball over the net. That follow-through may require another £40 billion. It may require another £100 billion. But you've got to follow through. You can't suddenly say, I don't have the money. Well, you didn't have the money for the £400 billion to start off with. That's illogical to me. You've got to do whatever it takes. And at a time like this, with Ukraine now as well, we have a real crisis with the consumers genuinely suffering. I'm hearing this from our members. We need to do something, and the government's got to move quickly before it is too late.
Well, I'm with you absolutely on that. Let me add another dimension and see if I can tempt you to equal clarity, and I have a feeling I might be able to. On energy, is it time to back off net zero for now so that industry, which faces those costs just as much as individual consumers do, back off for now and return to it in better economic times?
There is no question that we have to get to net zero, and we've as a country been ahead of the game. We've legislated for it. We've set targets in terms of years that we want to get to it. That is a destination we have to get to. But there is always going to be a challenge of the transition to get there. And that transition to get there means innovation and technology more than anything else. We've done brilliantly with wind power. We've done now doing amazing things with hydrogen. We've neglected our nuclear power. That has been shocking, the way we've neglected our nuclear power. Country and our neighbouring country, France, almost 80% of their energy is nuclear. We are way, way down. The idea of Rolls-Royce, for example, and their small modular reactors, each one can power the city the size of Sheffield. That's what we've got to focus on. Hydrogen, having our homes heated by green hydrogen is round the corner. Within a decade, one of our CBI members, Sedent, is doing work on this already in the northeast of England. That's going to be the solution. So let's invest in I'm the Chancellor of the University of Birmingham. At COP26, I'm so proud to say, developed by the University of Birmingham, we had the world's first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train in partnership with the rolling stock company Porterbrook, in partnership with 30 companies like Siemens, in partnership with the UK government, Innovate UK helping us, academia, government, business, working together on a world first. That's the future. That's what we've got to focus on.
Fascinating. Final question, and you lead into it beautifully by mentioning Birmingham University, but I'm talking about education generally. A predecessor of yours at the CBI, I think it may have been Digby, said years ago, the greatest single challenge that he saw was children leaving our schools who still cannot read or write. It is appalling that that remains the case now in the 21st century, made worse by the pandemic. Bob Halfon was out saying, come on, sort it out, sort it out. How important is that to you as the current boss of the CBI?
The key to anything is having education from a very young age. And do you know something? I spoke just recently during the pandemic to celebrate the 150th anniversary of state education. Our oldest public schools, private schools, go back to the 7th century. And yet you did not have state education until as recently as 150. And the age was 14. Then it went up to 16. 18-year-olds having the right to education until the age of 18 is only very recently. People don't realize this. And to me, the right to education is a human right. It is the most important thing. To encourage our children from a young age to have the confidence to be creative and innovative. We're a wonderful country. We have this amazing power of creativity. Just imagine if we enabled it even more. And our schools, look at the gap. To the cost of educating a state school child is £5,000 a year. You send a child to a top private school, which is only 7% of our children, £50,000 a year. Money. I think we need to put more money behind it. Our universities are the best in the world along with America. They're phenomenal. 1% of the world's population, we produce 14% of the world's leading research papers. We are brilliant. We've won more Nobel Prizes at Cambridge University than any other university in the world. But yet we underfund our universities. We do not invest enough in research and development and innovation. 1.7% of GDP. America, Germany, 3.1% of GDP. If we spend that extra 1%, £20 billion more a year in R&D and innovation, just imagine how much better we could do. This country's got phenomenal potential, and education is absolutely the key.
Got you loud and clear on tax and on energy and on government looking at what individual voters want as well as business. I've now got you loud and clear on education, and I'm hoping that you'll come back because there's one other bit I'd like to talk to you about, because I know you do it a lot yourself, and that is the role of philanthropy in broadening educational opportunity as well. But let's book that for another time, Karan, and thank you very much indeed for finding time for us this Saturday here on GB News. Thank you so much. Great to talk to you, as it always is. What a great guy. Karan Bilimoria, life peer and University Chancellor, as he just told us, but also founder of Cobra Beer.